Welcome, everybody. Thank you for coming this afternoon. I'm Susan Bryson. I teach in the philosophy department, and it is a real honor for me and one that gives me great pleasure to be able to introduce you to this year's Stephen R. Volk, class of '57 lecturer, Professor Mari Matsuda, who is professor of law at the Georgetown University Law Center. Prior to joining the faculty at Georgetown, Professor Matsuda was a professor of law at the University of California at Los Angeles School of Law, and prior to that, she taught at the University of Hawaii School of Law. The first tenured female Asian American law professor in the United States, Professor Matsuda is an activist scholar who has not only authored several critically acclaimed books and numerous law review articles that are among those most frequently cited, but has also published widely in academic and popular journals such as Amerasia Journal and Ms. Magazine. One of the primary voices in critical race theory since its inception, Professor Matsuda is internationally recognized expert on civil rights, feminist theory, affirmative action, and hate speech. Her books include Called from Within, Words That Wound, Where Is Your Body, and We Won't Go Back, Making a Case for Affirmative Action, which she co-authored with Charles Lawrence. Today's Volk Lecture is part of Dartmouth's two-week celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and is also part of this year's Dartmouth Center's Forum series on the topic Class Divide. I'd like to thank the people who made this event possible, the Dartmouth Lawyers Association, and the Rockefeller Center for Public Policy and the Social Sciences, especially Associate Director Sadhana Hall, and most especially the Coordinator of Public and Special Events, Judy Fothergill, who just reminded me to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. I'd also like to thank the co-sponsors of this talk, the Legal Studies faculty, especially this year's faculty convener, Professor Jim Murphy. The Office of Institutional Diversity and Equity, especially Holly Satea, the interim vice president, the Office of Pluralism and Leadership, in particular Nora Yasamura, the advisor to Asian and Asian American students, the Tucker Foundation, the Office of Student Life, and the East Wheelock Cluster. I'm not entirely sure when I first learned of Professor Matsuda's groundbreaking work, but it might have been in the course of reading Judge Avern Cohn's 1989 U.S. District Court opinion in the case that ruled unconstitutional the policy on discrimination and discriminatory harassment that had been adopted by the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor. Now, I thought this policy was an entirely appropriate and much needed response to a series of horrendously racist incidents on that campus. And I was genuinely baffled by Judge Cohn's opinion, which begins with the words, quote, "It is an unfortunate fact of our constitutional system that the ideals of freedom and equality are often in conflict." And it concludes that, quote, "While the court is sympathetic to the university's obligation to ensure equal educational opportunities for all its students, such efforts must not be at the expense of free speech." I thought, okay, where's the argument for that conclusion? And I couldn't find one, not in that opinion, nor in other judicial opinions in similar cases. But there was one note of hope at the end of Judge Cohn's opinion in the form of an addendum. In this, Judge Cohn wrote, quote, "Inexplicably, the court did not become aware of a conference on legal storytelling at the university's law school, that is University of Michigan's law school, in April 1989 until after its opinion was docked. Important for consideration of a broader perspective of the issues put by the policy and the court's holding of unconstitutionality under the First Amendment is a paper delivered at the conference by Mari J. Matsuda, Public Response to Racist Speech, Considering the Victim's Story, which was then published in the Michigan Law Review. Professor Matsuda's description of her purpose amply describes the significance of the paper. This is a quote from her article. "This article attempts to begin a conversation about the First Amendment that acknowledges both the civil libertarian's fear of tyranny and the victim's experience of loss of liberty in a society that tolerates racist speech. It suggests criminalization of a narrow, explicitly defined class of racist hate speech to provide public redress for the most serious harm, while leaving many forms of racist speech to private remedies. This is not an easy legal or moral puzzle. but it is precisely in these places where we feel conflicting tugs at heart and mind that we have the most work to do and the most knowledge to gain. Another area in which we currently have the most work to do and the most knowledge to gain is that of the inequities in our country's public education system. Professor Matsuda is currently at work on a book on this subject with Charles Lawrence, and her Voc lecture this afternoon is entitled Emancipation from Mental Slavery, Public Education and Social Change. Please join me in welcoming Professor Mari Matsuda.
Thank you, Dr. Bryson. Thank you, Dartmouth, for being here today. I know, particularly for those of you who are students, there are so many other places you could be right now, and I really appreciate that you came to hear me speak today. This was billed as a talk on public education, and I'm perfectly prepared to speak about public education, which is what I've been talking about endlessly, it seems, for the past 4 years. And I'd be happy to answer any questions you have about public education in the question and answer. And I am going to touch on public education, but there's a bigger question pushing me, and that's the social change part of my talk. So most of what I say today is going to move in that direction. But I hope to make this a conversation so we can take this wherever this audience chooses to go. The snow is falling on the ground, and beautiful is the face of my beloved. That is a line of Kenneth Patchen poetry that came to me when I looked out on your green this morning. And it's from a love poem, but also an anti-war poem. The poet intended to contrast that intimate experience of being next to someone you love with what's going on in the wider world, where war rages and bodies are ripped apart like rags. While quiet snow falls, quiet violence happens everywhere. In Washington, D.C., where I live, a couple of weeks ago, a mentally ill mother was found in her home with the bodies of her 4 dead children, bodies that had been sitting there, the police think, for about 6 months. In the nearby suburbs, a child died because he had a toothache, a cavity, that went untreated until it became a brain abscess. In both of these cases, a caring person anticipated disaster. A school social worker called the police. You've got to get into that house. I haven't seen these children in school. Something's wrong. And she called several times, and we have recordings of those phone calls. A legal aid lawyer tried to help the mother of the child with the cavity. She went from dentist to dentist. Will you take Medicaid? No. So these community caretakers are left to mourn. The press follows up with a series of articles, should have, could have, if only.